Russia's objective is to create so-called buffer zones along the border, pushing Ukrainian forces further away, stretching Ukrainian reserves, and bringing more Ukrainian territory within artillery range. Instead of launching major offensives, for which the Russians lack troops and equipment, Russian forces probe weak sections with groups often numbering just 2 to 5 soldiers. They move through forests, lightly defended roads and villages, sometimes even wearing civilian clothing, hoping to establish positions that can later receive reinforcements. Ukrainian forces are systematically clearing Russia's border infiltrations in Kharkiv region, eliminating one assault group after another before they can establish meaningful footholds. Despite both armies suffering from manpower shortages, their two approaches to the fighting on the international border show how drastic the difference is. However, Russia suffers from the same resource shortage it is trying to exploit. Moscow lacks enough available manpower, armor, engineering equipment, and logistics to launch a high-intensity offensive across the Kharkiv border. Its small groups may enter territory, but they struggle to hold it because once detected, they have little firepower and no reinforcements. The Russian command is essentially hoping that Ukrainian forces will react slowly, but increasingly, their hopes are fruitless. This Russian tactic exploits an unavoidable problem, as Ukraine cannot physically defend every meter of its enormous northern border during wartime. Placing infantry along every forest, field, and crossing would consume huge numbers of soldiers that are needed elsewhere on the front. Russia therefore searches for gaps for infiltrators to move quickly, as a tiny penetration can theoretically force Ukraine to react and divert even more reserves from other hot areas on the front line. Once infiltrators are detected, FPV drones, bomber drones, artillery, and assault teams engage them, with Ukrainian quick response units ready to deploy across a much wider front, holding the entire border with far fewer men successfully. Ukraine has effectively replaced a continuous physical defensive line with a surveillance and strike network. As a result, even though Russia exploits empty space, Ukraine makes it an observable kill zone. The two sides have therefore approached their manpower limitations differently. Russia continues sending small groups through gaps at ineffective intensity. Ukraine, meanwhile, does not attempt to fill every gap with soldiers. Instead, reconnaissance drones continuously observe roads, forests, settlements, and border approaches. Artillery first struck Russian hideouts before Ukrainian operators advanced on foot, clearing the survivors and pushing them directly back toward the border. Ukrainian reinforcements then secured the area, while octocopters and FPV drones subsequently attacked the Russian forces supporting the infiltration from inside Russia, destroying personnel, movement routes, rear positions, and an armored vehicle. The recent Russian infiltration attempts near Kozacha-Lopan demonstrated this approach clearly, as several Russian groups of 2 or 3 soldiers each crossed the border using the main road. Ukrainian drone surveillance located them almost immediately, after which assault troops from the Ukrainian Skala assault unit planned the clearing mission carefully and moved in toward the breach on ATV on the next day. One video shows Ukrainian soldiers pouring a flammable substance into a trench, setting the enemy on fire to flush them out of their hideout. Ukrainian units recaptured Odrodne and nearby territory, with Russian forces reportedly losing 56 soldiers without achieving anything. The same pattern unfolded around to the east, near the settlements of Odrodne and Milove, where Russian forces infiltrated along 3 vectors, attempting to establish positions and dig into the forests surrounding the settlements that could provide cover. They were spotted almost immediately, after which Ukrainian drones dropped grenades onto their positions. FPV drones attacked troops attempting to change positions, and Ukrainian assault teams advanced on foot to clear the fortified positions, tree lines, and strong points. At nearby Chuhunivka, 3 Russians attempted something even more symbolic by entering the settlement simply to film themselves waving a flag as proof of Russian control. It lasted only minutes, as Ukrainian forces captured them shortly afterward and published footage of their interrogation. Remarkably, Russian troops had attempted similar operations against these settlements 2 months earlier, and were immediately caught then as well. But their command refuses to learn.
Systematic clearing operations conclude months-long Russian offensive, with Ukraine controlling key supply routes to Kramatorsk. Ukrainian forces are closing the gap around the remaining Russian forces in their Dobropilya salient. As Ukrainians finish off pockets of Russian resistance, the Russians' only hope is to surrender to the advancing Ukrainian army or be annihilated completely. After conducting a successful penetration from the high ground in the west, Ukrainians are now launching their attacks from the north as well, completing the pincer around the Russian Dobropilya salient. Ukrainians are using highly trained infantry squads to move in, engaging with Russian forces along the way. The main advantage of the Ukrainians here is their far superior ground lines of communication, enjoying a direct supply line from Kramatorsk and Ruzhivka, functioning as central operating hubs for Ukrainian forces in northern Donetsk. Additionally, if we take a look at the topographic map, we can see that as the Ukrainian supply lines approach the front, they cross through several settlements in the valley between 2 hills. This blocks signals for Russian drones, who mainly rely on FPV-type kamikaze drones instead of munitions dropped from drones. Russian fiber optics also still only makes up approximately 20% of FPVs used by the Russians, so the valley Ukrainians move through is largely protected against most Russian strikes. The buildings in the settlements and tree lines running along them offer additional concealment factors to Ukrainian infantry units passing through. The last major Ukrainian advantage is their extensive utilization of heavy drones, like the Heavy Vampire and Baba Yaga variants. Because these drones drop heavy explosives or a series of smaller mortar rounds from a height, they are able to fly and hover above the valley, unaffected by the weaker signal strength that Russians suffer from lower to the ground. Geolocated footage shows how Ukrainian infantry squads move south through the settlements under the watchful eye and in constant communication with Mavic reconnaissance drones that detect any Russian presence. The Ukrainian squad initially engaged the position with grenade launchers, using high explosive rounds. However, the rounds were not penetrating into the basement, where some of the Russians were hiding. So to save manpower, ammunition, and time, a Vampire hexacopter drone was called in. The drone then dropped 4 mortar rounds directly on the basement, wiping out the structure and scoring several direct hits into the underground structure itself. Russian infantry attempting to flank Ukrainian attacks from the high ground to the east are also promptly intercepted by Ukrainian FPV drones patrolling the area, as signal strengths are much less disrupted on the high ground and the slopes that the Russians must move across first. In this manner, Ukrainians are systematically moving south, having already consolidated full control of Volodymyrivka and expanding the gray zone to fully encompass the Russian salient. As you remember from a previous report, Ukrainians avoided finishing off the 2 Russian encirclements further north to lure more Russian forces in to attempt to rescue them, while keeping them away from important positions. However, with the trap now sprung, there is little reason to keep these pockets alive, and the final clearing operations have begun. Ukrainian soldiers on the ground report that the western pocket has been cleared completely, as their attention is now moving to the one to the east. Every Russian is first offered surrender and to be taken as a prisoner of war. However, if they hold out and refuse, they are promptly dispatched. As Ukrainian forces are much needed elsewhere, and maintaining a tight perimeter costs a lot of resources. Overall, Ukrainians are closing the gates and finishing off any Russian soldiers who remain, as Ukrainian soldiers on the ground are already reporting that the prisoner of war exchange fund is rapidly being replenished. In the gray zone, Russian units moving through are now eliminated by drones, as Ukrainian infantry is making their way forward, leaving the fields covered in Russian bodies. The Russian Dobropilya breakthrough event is coming to a close, as many Russian generals will soon start shifting the blame to one another, as a hammer of consequences is sure to soon come from the direction of Moscow.